The great Shakespeare was speaking the mind of God, when he said, "Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win, by fearing to attempt." The emotion most deadly for destroying human lives is fear. Fear demoralizes character, destroys ambition, induces or causes disease, paralyzes happiness in oneself and others, and prevents achievement. It has not one single good quality. It is all evil, and we must be on guard to ensure this deadly emotion is not allowed in our lives. Physiologists now well know that fear impoverishes the blood by demoralizing assimilation and cutting off nutrition. It lowers mental and physical vitality, deadens every element of success. It is fatal to our happiness, and is the most terrible accompaniment of old age. The most extensive of all the morbid mental conditions which reflect themselves so disastrously on the human system is the state of fear, says Dr. William H. Holcomb. It has many degrees or gradations, from the state of extreme alarm, fright, or terror, down to the slightest shade of apprehension of impending evil. But all along the line, it is the same thing, a paralyzing impression upon the centers of life which can produce, through the agency of the nervous system, a vast variety of horrible symptoms in every tissue of the body. Fear is like a carbonic acid gas pumped into one's atmosphere, says Horace Fletcher. It causes mental, moral, and spiritual suffocation, and sometimes death, death to energy, death to tissue, and death to all growth. Yet from our birth we live in the presence and under the dominion of this demonic emotion called fear. The child is cautioned 1,000 times a year to look out for this, and to look out for that. It may get poisoned, it may get bitten, it may get killed, something terrible things may happen to it, if it does not do so and so. There are some men and women who cannot bear the sight of some harmless animal or insect, because, as children, they were told it would hurt them. One of the cruelest things imaginable is to impress into a child's plastic mind the terrible image of fear, which, like the letters cut upon a sapling, grows wider and deeper with age. The baleful shadows of such blasting and blighting pictures will hang over the whole life and shut out the bright sun of joy and happiness. A wise writer once wrote, "One of the worst misfortunes which can possibly happen to a growing child is to have a mother who is perpetually tormented by nervous fears. If a mother gives way to fears, she will inevitably make the environment of her children one of increasing dread and timidity." The background of fear is the habit or instinct of anticipating the worst. The mother who never makes a move, or allows her children to make a move, without conjuring up a myriad of negative possibilities, embitters the cup of life with a slow-acting poison. For more than 20 years, I have made a study of criminal psychology and of infantile psychology, says Dr. Lino Ferriani. Thousands of times I have been compelled to recognize the sad fact that at least 88% of horribly timid children could have been cured and saved in time by means of common-sense principles of psychical and physiological hygiene, in which the main factor is suggestion inspired by wholesome courage. Not understanding the psychological effects, many mothers and most nurses invent all sorts of bugbears and bogies to frighten poor babies into obedience. They even attempt to induce sleep by telling children, "If you don't go right to sleep, a great big bear will come and eat you up." How much sleep would a grown man get in a situation where this was a real possibility? Fear of the dark would seldom exist if parents carefully showed children that nothing is different in the dark from what it is in the light. Many mothers waste much energy in worrying about their children. Some of them cannot take a moment's comfort while their boys or girls are out of their sight. How many times, in imagination, have you seen your children tumble out of trees and off sheds? How many times have you pictured them drowning when they went for a sail or a skate? How often have you had visions of your boy being brought home from the baseball or football grounds with broken limbs or scarred face? When none of these things happened, what had you to compensate for the hours of mental anguish, with consequent lowering of vitality and physical tone? Such useless imaginings of evil make many women old and haggard before their time. The worst of it is that so many of these women think it is their duty, and a sign of their great love to worry all the time. With fearsome and anxious parents surrounding children with an atmosphere of dread, and suggesting to them every objects of fear, it is not astonishing that the whole world seems burdened and bowed down under a fearful weight of fear and anxiety. The fear of accident, of sickness, of poverty, of death, of some terrible misfortune, still lingers in some even till their old age. Thousands of people thus live their lives under the shadow of fear, haunted by the dread of some vague, impending evil. Many of us narrow our lives by worrying over what may happen tomorrow. We cannot afford to have any little, legitimate pleasure, to travel, or to take the much-needed vacations because of fear of tomorrow. We must economize on clothes, on food even, and on every form of culture or recreation costing money, simply because times may be hard next year. Some people are just natural pessimists, they only think of the worst. They are constantly saying in their mind, oh, there may be a financial panic, some of the children may be sick, the times may be bad, our crops may fail, the business venture may not succeed. Their motto always is, we can't tell what might happen, but we must prepare for the worst. Their lives are mutilated, sometimes utterly ruined, by this bugbear of misfortune just ahead. One of the worst features of this parsimonious, anxious, fearful way of living is that it stunts the development of lives, and throws its dark shadow over the future as well as the present. I do not mean to discourage proper economy and frugality, but this gloomy fear that something may happen, this postponing enjoyment, education, culture, travel, books, innocent pleasures of every kind, until the sensibilities become hardened, until the aesthetic faculties are dead, is a disease of narrow, fearful souls, which every sane person should guard against. Think of the millions of human creatures that God has made and placed on this glad earth, endowed with every faculty possible to enable them to enjoy life, wasting precious years in worrying and fretting lest something may happen. How pitiful are the anxious, wrinkled faces, the gray hairs, the unhappy expressions of those who worry about possible misfortunes? Not one wrinkle in 1,000, not one gray hair in 1,000,000, has been produced by actual illness. The things which turn hair gray and paint fair faces with cruel furrows, which rob many of their beautiful sleeps, and take cheerfulness from life are misfortunes that never came. The sorrows and trials which actually come to us are, except in rare instances, little compared with the things about which we worry, but which never come to pass. What a waste of energy and human life is involved in this pernicious habit of anticipating evil. Think of the amount of work you could have accomplished by the mental and physical force you have expended in fearing what might happen, but which did not. Think of the wasted hours in which you planned what you would do if misfortune should come. If we could only rid ourselves of imaginary troubles, our lives would be infinitely happier and healthier. Thus one of the greatest tasks in character building is to eliminate, to uproot, to wipe out completely the threatening effects of fear in all its varieties of manifestation. No one can lead a naturally healthy, sunny, helpful, harmonious life while living under the influence of fear. No one can hope to be entirely happy and successful without the complete destruction, the total eradication, of the virus called fear. If this is done, the world would be gloriously changed for the better. It is the duty of every individual to conquer this common enemy in his own mind, and to do all he or she can to wrest other people, especially the young, from the dominion of this phantom monster. Research and investigations have proven that this may be done, and it is a glorious prophecy that you too can banish all fear, you can march, clear-eyed and confident, toward your goal of perfect happiness. Remember, 90% of what you fear will never happen. Now, having outlined the evil effects of fear on our body and nervous system, how do we overcome this negative emotion? How do we eliminate it completely from our consciousness? One thing to always remember is that the word fear is an acronym for false expression appearing real. So, in setting about the overcoming of fear, we must first understand what it is that we fear. It is always something that has not yet happened, that is, it is non-existent. Fear is an imaginary something that we think of, and which frightens us with its possibility. Suppose you are afraid of a particular type of disease, that is, you are afraid of the suffering caused by the disease, and especially of its probable fatal termination of lives. As long as you have not the disease, it does not exist for you. If you have it, it has not killed you yet, and it may not do so. The most that can actually exist for you at any one time is pain and physical weakness. A state of terror aggravates every disagreeable feature of the illness and makes a fatal issue almost certain. It is because this disease is so feared that it is so often fatal, and even its contagion seems to be governed very largely by the fear people have of it, in spite of germs, and microscopic proofs of their part in the development of the disease. That is, the germs do not often affect a normal, healthy, fearless person. During a yellow fever epidemic at New Orleans, in the days before, all the doctors had agreed that the disease is contagious. A young northern teacher arrived at a hotel with a high fever. Dr. Samuel Cartwright was called. The next morning, Dr. Cartwright called the officers of the hotel and all the regular boarders into the parlor and made them a speech as follows: "You may have noticed that this young lady has yellow fever. It is not contagious. None of you will take it from her, and if you will follow my advice, you will save this town from a panic, and a panic is the hotbed of an epidemic. Say nothing about this case. Ignore it absolutely. Let the ladies of the house help nurse her, and take flowers and delicacies to her, and act altogether as if it were some everyday affair, unattended by danger. It will save her life, and perhaps, in the long run, many others. The advised course was agreed to by all but one woman, who proceeded to quarantine herself in the most remote room of the hotel. The young teacher got well, and no one in the house except this terror-stricken woman took yellow fever. Even she recovered. By his great reputation and his strong magnetic power, Dr. Cartwright dissipated the fears of those around him and prevented an epidemic. For this grand appreciation and successful application of a principle, the power of mind and thought over physical conditions, a power just dawning on the perception of the race, he deserves a nobler monument than any we have accorded heroes and statesmen. Most people are afraid to walk on a narrow place high above ground. If that same narrow space were marked on a broad walk, they could keep within it perfectly, and never think of losing balance. The only dangerous thing about walking in such a place is the fear of falling. Steady-headed people are simply fearless, they do not allow the thought of possible danger to overcome them, but keep their physical powers under perfect control. An acrobat has only to conquer fear to perform most of the feats that astound spectators. For some feats, special training and development of the muscles, or of the eye and judgment, are necessary, but a cool, fearless head is all that is necessary for most. The nightmares that frighten a child into convulsions in a dark room do not exist for the parent. When the child is convinced that the ghosts and monsters are not real, the terror ceases. A city child who had never walked on the grass showed terror when first placed on yielding turf, and walked as gingerly as if it had been hot iron. There was nothing to be afraid of, but the child thought there was. Once the belief of danger was eradicated, the fear was gone. So it would be with grown-up if we could but once rise to the conviction that fear is but an image of the mind, and that it has no existence except in our consciousness, and no power to harm, except that which we give it. Take a very common fear, that of losing one's position. The people who make their lives miserable, worrying about this possible misfortune, have not yet been discharged of their duty. As long as they have not, they are suffering for no reason, there is no danger of want. The present situation is therefore satisfactory. If discharge comes, it is then too late to worry about its coming, and all previous worrying would have been pure waste, doing no good, but rather weakening one for the necessary struggle to get placed again. The thing to worry about then will be that another place will not be found. If a place is found, all the worrying will again be useless. Under no circumstances can the worrying be justified by the situation at any particular time. Its object is always an imaginary situation of the future. If you are to overcome your various fears, follow each one out to its logical conclusion, and convince yourself that at the present moment the things you fear do not exist, except in your imagination. Whether they ever come to pass in the future or not, your fear is a waste of time, waste of energy, and actual waste of mental strength. Quit worrying just as you would quit eating or drinking something you felt sure had caused you pain in the past. Merely convincing yourself that what you fear is imaginary will not suffice until you have trained your mind to throw off suggestions of fear, and to combat all thought that leads to it. This means constant watchfulness and alert mental effort. When the thoughts of worry begin to suggest themselves, do not indulge them or let them grow big and black, but change your thought, think of all that tends in the opposite direction. If the fear is of personal failure, instead of thinking how little and weak you are, how well prepared for the great task, and how sure you are to fail, think how strong and competent you are, how you have done similar tasks, and how you are going to utilize all your past experience and rise to this present occasion, do the task triumphantly, and be ready for a bigger one. It is such an attitude as this, whether consciously assumed or not, that carries men to higher and yet higher places. This same principle of crowding out the fear thought by a cheerful, hopeful, confident thought can be applied to all the many kinds of fear that daily and hourly beset us. At first it will be hard to change the current of thought, to cease to dwell on sad and depressing things. An aid in the process is often advisable. A sudden change of work to something requiring concentration of mind will often act as a switch. Recalling some humorous or pleasant incident will often drive away dull moment. A very interesting or very humorous book is pretty sure to work well if one really reads with attention. In the last analysis, all fear resolves itself into fear of death, and writers on the means of getting rid of fear dwell especially on this basic form. Death will perhaps always be a mystery, but whatever view of it be taken, a logical analysis will remove the terror of it, especially that form which makes lifeless human flesh a repulsive and terrible object. We think the feeling that Hindus have about the flesh of animals is very strange, since to us this is most appetizing food. Our own fear of a human corpse is just as foolish as the Hindu fear, and if we would rid ourselves of fear, we must teach ourselves so. Familiarity with the thing feared is always advisable, and frequently is quite sufficient. We know this to be true with horses, and have only to apply the matter to our own foolish fears. Horace Fletcher advises even a course in a hospital dissecting room if nothing else will dissipate the unreasoning fear of a dead body. Whatever may lie beyond the tomb, says W.E.H. Lecky, the tomb itself is nothing to us. The narrow prison house, the gloomy pomp, the hideousness of decay, are known to the living, and the living alone. By a too common illusion of the imagination, men picture themselves as consciously dead going through the process of corruption, and aware of it, imprisoned, with a knowledge of the fact, in the most hideous of dungeons. Endeavor, earnestly, try to erase this illusion from your mind, for it lies at the root of the fear of death, and it is one of the worst sides of medieval and much modern art that it tends to strengthen it. Nothing, if we truly realize it, is less real than the grave. We should be no more concerned with the after fate of our discarded bodies than with that of the hair which the hair cutter has cut off. The sooner they are resolved into their primitive elements the better. The imagination should never be suffered to dwell upon their decay. Whatever the means, the task of conquering fear is the most important in character building, and it will repay any effort. Not until this is done effectively can the human soul take its proper place, rise to its God-given dominion, and progress to higher and yet higher planes of power. The great Shakespeare was speaking the mind of God, when he said, "Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win, by fearing to attempt." The emotion most deadly for destroying human lives is fear. Fear demoralizes character, destroys ambition, induces or causes disease, paralyzes happiness in oneself and others.